Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to compare acrylic paint versus watercolor paint. So what's the pros, what's the cons? Let's talk about it. So what are some of the cons and pros to watercolor paint? For me, one of the pros would be it is very forgiving. Watercolor paint, as it implies in its name, is water soluble. When you make a mistake, it's going to dry quickly, but with a little bit of water, it will reactivate your paint and you can continue with your design. Another thing I like a lot about it is you can be very loose in your designs with your paintbrush and you'll still create a nice, relaxed type of design, I would call it. Watercolor paint, it has a very long lifespan. And I say that because I have had 5 tubes of watercolor paint and it's lasted me over 2 to 3 years. And I do use it and have used it quite a bit. The reason for that is because you're diluting it constantly with water. You only need a little bit and you'll have enough for a whole canvas. So overall, it's very easy to work with. Now to the cons. One of the cons is that you can only use watercolor paper to paint your designs with watercolor paint. Watercolor paint will absorb into its surface, and so if you use anything other than this, it's going to just spread weird or react funny. So one way to fix that issue I have found is gesso. So if you prime your canvas with some gesso, then you can paint watercolor on a canvas. Another con to watercolor paint is you can't really paint fine details as you would with acrylic paint, but depending on your style of art, it might not be an issue at all. One thing I have an issue personally with watercolor paint is it's fast drying, yes, but sometimes I'm not always that patient for it to dry. And so I'll have 2 separate designs on my page. If I start working too close to a little flower or something, the water is going to seep into your other design. That's just the way that watercolor flows. If you work with it and you get used to it, that's great, but personally I just had that struggle. Real life. Overall, I do highly recommend using watercolor paint. I started out my painting journey with watercolor pencils and then moved on to watercolor paint. Let's talk about acrylic paint. Acrylic paint is my favorite medium to use for art. So acrylic paint comes in a variety of consistencies. I prefer the ones that are just like a cheap little tube of very liquidy paint. They're just easy to work with. Acrylic paint is also water soluble. It's great for cleaning your brushes because it comes off so easily. Just add a little bit of soap and water and your brush is basically as good as new. An interesting fact about acrylic paint, if you dilute it enough, then you can get a watercolor effect, but still using acrylic paint. Another pro to acrylic paint is the amazing textures that you can make. If you're making a leaf or something, you can create the texture of the edge. It gives you a nice depth to the whole design. One more thing that I really love about acrylic paint is the opacity. It comes in so many different fun colors and you can mix them, and I just love all the colors. It's so happy and vibrant. Speaking of its opacity, one of the cons to acrylic paint is you're not necessarily going to achieve the same color that you paint with because when it dries, it tends to dry a little bit darker. Another con to acrylic paint is it's perfect. I'm sorry, I can't think of any. No. The problem with the creating texture in the designs sometimes is if you make a mistake or if you just simply want to change a little bit of your design and tweak it, but you've already created that texture, once you go over it with more paint, that texture will remain. It's gonna be there and it's gonna show. unless you add more texture or your design just flows the right way and it comes out perfectly. I don't know. That's one of the things I dislike about it. So that concludes our video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about the pros and cons. Maybe this helped you decide if you want to start painting with acrylic paint or watercolor paint. Both, in my opinion, are great to work with. They're great for beginners. They're great for anyone. Anyone can paint. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. I really appreciate it, and hit subscribe. I'll be posting another video next week, and until then, as always, happy painting.